Have you ever been so angry, so utterly betrayed,
Yeah.
that you didn't just want justice? I mean, you wanted the person who hurt you to suffer. I'm
Yeah.
talking about that white-hot, chest-tightening feeling where you aren't thinking about forgiveness and you're definitely not thinking about turning the other cheek.
No, not at all.
You're thinking about karma coming down like a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And look, we've all felt it, but most of us are too polite or maybe too scared to admit it.
That's a universal human experience for sure, but you're right to point out that tension. We don't expect to find that level of raw, unfiltered rage in, of all places, the Bible.
Exactly. We think of the Psalms as these, I don't know, gentle poems.
Right, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd.
Yeah. It's comforting. It's safe. It's what you put on a coffee mug.
Yeah.
You picture, like, green pastures, harp music.
Yeah.
But today, we are doing a deep dive into Psalm 109. And let me just say, there are no still waters here. This is a hurricane. And it's, honestly, kind of frightening.
It is shocking stuff. In theological circles, Psalm 109 belongs to a genre they call imprecatory songs.
Imprecatory.
Yeah, imprecation is just a fancy technical term for a curse. It's a cry for vengeance. In this text, David, the same guy who wrote that nice shepherd poem, is calling down absolute ruin on his enemies.
Wow.
It really challenges our modern ideas about what prayer is. You know, what it's supposed to sound like.
That it should be polite.
Right, composed, benevolent. This is, well, it's none of those things.
So our mission today is to unpack this text without flinching. We need to figure out why this kind of aggression is even in the Bible, what's psychologically going on with David, and here's the kicker, how this actually applies to our own emotional health. I mean, is it okay to be this angry with God?
That is the core question. But to understand the rage, we have to understand the trigger. You don't get to this level of explosion without a pretty serious spark. David isn't just having a bad day.
No.
The text says in the opening verses he's dealing with the mouth of the wicked and lying tongues.
And that brings us to the first key insight, the anatomy of betrayal. In verses 1 through 5, the first thing that jumps out is the weapon of choice. He's not dodging spears here.
No, it's not physical.
He's dodging rumors. Verse 3 says, "They compassed me about also with words of hatred."
It's a crucial distinction. The attack is verbal. It's character assassination. And think about how helpless that makes you feel. If someone throws a rock at you, you can duck. But if someone spreads a lie,
What do? It's everywhere.
it surrounds you. It compasses you, like the text says. And what makes it so painful for David is the element of betrayal. We see a clear violation of reciprocity.
Reciprocity. You mean like the social contract, the whole I scratch your back, you scratch mine thing?
It's even deeper than that, really. It's the expectation that if I treat you with love, you won't, try to destroy me.
Right.
And verse 4 hits this so hard. David says, "For my love, they are my adversaries." And verse 5, "They have rewarded me evil for good and hatred for my love."
Ugh, that's the worst type of pain, isn't it? It's not a stranger. It's someone you poured yourself into, you loved them, and their response is to turn around and stab you in the back.
It dismantles your sense of fairness in the world. It's the ultimate injustice. Now, historically, when a king is betrayed like this, what's the next move?
Oh, war. Arrests. You crush the threat.
You leverage your power, exactly. But look at David's first reaction in verse 4. He doesn't say, "So I sharpened my sword."
No, he says 4 simple words. But I give myself unto prayer.
It's a profound pivot. He turns to the only court of appeals that matters to him. But, and this is so important to grasp, this is not a polite request. He isn't asking for, peace and patience.
No.
By saying, "I give myself unto prayer," he is setting the stage for some brutal honesty. He's bringing the full weight of his emotion to God.
And when you say full weight, you are not kidding. This takes us into the dark heart of the psalm. And I have to warn everyone listening, you might want to buckle up. Because here's where the imprecations, the curses, begin. Verses 6 through 20. And David gets uncomfortably specific.
He really does. He moves from describing his pain to, prescribing the punishment he thinks this wicked man deserves.
It's not just, I hope he has a bad day. In verse 8, David says, "Let his days be few, and let another take his office."
So, professional ruin.
He's praying for the guy to be replaced and then die.
And it goes even further. He targets the family. Verse 9, "Let his children be fatherless and his wife a widow."
Whoa, hold on. That feels like it crosses a line. Attacking the guy is one thing, but wishing his kids become orphans, That's selfly malicious. It sounds like something a villain would say.
It sounds incredibly malicious to our modern ears for sure,
Yeah.
but we have to look at what David is actually asking for. He wants the influence of this wicked person completely severed. But you're right, he keeps going. Read verse 10.
Let his children be continually vagabonds and beg.
Yeah.
So he wants this guy's kids to be homeless beggars. Then verse 13, he goes to the legacy. Let his posterity be cut off. Let their name be blotted out.
He wants this guy erased from history.
Erased.
Yes. In the ancient world, your immortality was your lineage, your name. If your name was forgotten, you effectively ceased to exist. So David is asking for total annihilation, professional, familial, and historical.
But why? Why go
Yeah.
that far? Is David just a psychopath?
No, I think he's a man who is being consumed by this. And to understand the severity, look at the imagery he uses in verses 18 and 19. He describes the enemy as someone who loved cursing.
Okay.
The text says the enemy clothed himself with cursing like a garment.
So this enemy was just a toxic person who spread hate everywhere. They wore it like a coat.
Exactly. And because the enemy loved to curse others, David prays that cursing would come into him, and listen to this metaphor, like water into his bowels and like oil into his bones.
Yes, that image of oil soaking into bones. It's so visceral. Water you can dry off.
Hmm.
But oil,
If it gets into a porous surface, it stains forever. It's like the hatred isn't just on the surface anymore. It's seeping into the very marrow of his being. It captures how consuming the situation is. And this brings us to a really important point of analysis from our sources about this idea of ancient wisdom. This is classified as honest lament.
honest lament. It sounds like a temper tantrum. A really, really violent one.
It is a tantrum, in a way, but it's a directed one. David isn't filtering his thoughts. He isn't pretending to be a good believer who's above anger. He is showing us what it looks like to take the mask off before God.
So you're saying he's not necessarily right to want these things, like the starving children, but he is right to admit that he wants them.
Precisely. That is the key distinction. The text validates the expression of the anger, not necessarily the actions of revenge. He acts out his rage in prayer so that he doesn't have to act it out in the streets.
Okay, that makes sense.
He's acknowledging that slander, these lying tongues, can wound more deeply than a physical attack, and he's demanding justice that matches that level of pain.
It's so intense. It's almost exhausting just to read it. But then, just when you think he's going to explode from all this rage, something shifts. We hit the third section, the pivot. In verse 21, the tone changes completely. He says, "But do thou for me, O God the Lord, for thy name's sake."
This is the turning point. Up until verse 20, the focus is all on the enemy, what they did, what should happen to them. At verse 21, the camera just swings around.
Right.
The focus shifts to David's own condition and his reliance on God.
And his condition is, it's not great. He goes from this fire-breathing avenger to sounding incredibly fragile. Verse 22, "I am poor and needy, and my heart is wounded within me."
He just drops the bravado. He admits his vulnerability. Verse 24 says, "My knees are weak through fasting, and my flesh faileth of fatness."
That sounds like physical symptoms of depression or extreme stress,
Yeah.
when you're so anxious you can't eat.
It is. He's physically wasting away from the stress of this. The anger isn't fueling him anymore. It's draining him.
And verse 23 is so poetic but so sad. "I am gone like the shadow when it declineth." He feels like he's fading away. It's such a stark contrast to the guy who was just screaming for his enemy's kids to be beggars. The balloon has just deflated.
It shows the toll that hatred takes on a person. You can't hold that much fire without getting burned yourself.
Yeah.
And notice verse 25, he mentions public perception. He has become a reproach, a disgrace.
Yeah.
When people look at him, they shake their heads.
Oh, that's the worst feeling. Being the topic of gossip, seeing people whispering and shaking their heads when you walk by,
Yeah.
it isolates you.
It does. But look at what he asks for in verse 27. This is the critical shift. He stops telling God how to destroy the enemy, all those specific curses, and he starts asking God to save him according to mercy. And the goal is crucial.
What's the goal?
He says, "that they may know that this is thy hand, that thou, Lord, hast done it."
So it's not just about him winning. It's about God's reputation. He wants the outcome to prove that God is real, that God acts.
Exactly. It moves from personal revenge to divine vindication. He's saying, "My name is mud, God, so you have to act for the sake of your name."
Okay, let's pause here and really unpack this for us today, because we aren't ancient kings. And hopefully we aren't wishing for people's children to be vagabonds. So what do we do with a text like this?
This is where the modern application becomes very powerful, particularly around psychology and mental health. Our source material highlights that modern psychology really emphasizes acknowledging emotions rather than burying them.
Right, the old stiff upper lip thing. Just stuff it down.
Yeah.
Good people don't get angry.
And we know now that stuffing it down is a recipe for disaster. If David had bottled this up, if he'd smiled and said, "It's fine, I forgive them," that toxicity would have eaten him alive. It would have been that oil in the bones. Psalm 109 is an ancient form of catharsis.
A catharsis,
Yeah.
clearing out the system, like lancing a boil.
Yes. The lesson here is that it's so much better to express that raw anger to God than to act destructively toward other people.
That's a huge distinction. He's yelling at God, not punching his neighbor.
Precisely. It creates a safe container for the rage. And think about his environment surrounded by lying tongues. Does that sound at all familiar?
Oh, absolutely. That's the internet. That's social media. We live in the era of misinformation. You can lose your reputation in a single tweet.
We do. Today, character assassination happens online, gossip travels instantly, the source material notes that words matter, and David's anguish reminds us that false accusations aren't small things. They cause real trauma.
And the text challenges us, right? If we know how much words can hurt, we have a responsibility to use our words for healing, not harm. But I want to push back on something.
Go ahead.
It feels a little like a cop-out to just say, pray about it. We want justice. If someone destroys my reputation at work, I don't just want to pray, I want to see them fired. I want them to feel what I felt.
And that brings us to maybe the most difficult application here, the distinction between justice and revenge.
Is there a difference? In the moment, they feel exactly the same.
They feel the same, but the mechanism is different. Justice restores order. Revenge inflicts pain. And David, for all his violent language, does not take matters into his own hands. He asks God to act. He says, let God judge. He doesn't gather a mob.
So he relinquishes the role of executioner.
Exactly. In a modern context like that workplace conflict, the application isn't to slash their tires. It's to seek justice through the proper channels, let truth prevail, but to release the burden of personal retaliation.
It's about trusting a system of higher justice. Spiritually, as the psalm argues, it's trusting that God sees the truth. It's admitting, I can't fix this by hurting you, so I'm handing the case file over.
And that trust leads us to the final part of our deep dive, strengthening trust in God. Because despite all the gloom and doom, the psalm ends on a surprisingly high note.
It does. Verses 30 and 31, David says, he shall stand at the right hand of the poor.
Wait, let's connect that back. Do you remember verse 6?
In verse 6, he asks for Satan, an accuser, to stand at the enemy's right hand.
A brilliant observation. So, the enemy has an accuser at his right hand, but the poor, the vulnerable one being attacked, has God at their right hand.
That is a powerful image, a complete reversal.
It teaches us that God is a sanctuary. The source material emphasizes this. God can handle our rawest emotions. We don't have to clean up our act before we pray.
Right.
We can bring the rage, the ugly thoughts, the oil into bones, feelings directly to him.
I love that. You don't have to put on a church face for God. You don't have to pretend you're fine when you're dying inside. He already knows anyway.
Exactly. And by bringing it to him, the text emphasizes God's solidarity with the vulnerable. He stands with the marginalized, with the falsely accused.
And you can see the change in David. The expert analysis points out that the very structure of the psalm shows that movement.
Yes, it moves from rage and anguish toward renewed confidence. Prayer transforms pain into trust. The enemy is still there, the lies are still being told, but just the act of pouring it out has shifted his perspective.
From, I am gone like a shadow, to, I will greatly praise the Lord.
That's the journey.
So he went from being attacked by lies to wishing absolute ruin on people, I mean really dark, specific stuff, to realizing that God is the ultimate defender of the weak.
It's a journey from the courtroom of our own anger to the throne room of divine justice.
So, to distill this down, Psalm 109 isn't a mistake in the Bible, it's a mirror. It reflects how much betrayal hurts. It teaches us that true justice belongs to God. And it invites us to pour out our pain in prayer, rather than letting it turn into personal revenge.
And it reminds us that when we are the ones who are poor and needy, falsely accused, we're not alone. God stands at our right hand.
That's a comforting thought to hold on to. We've unpacked the curses, the pain, and the ultimate trust. Now, we want to leave you with something to think about as you go back to your day. Based on everything we've discussed about honesty, anger, and justice, how will you apply this information in your life? Thanks for diving deep with us.